Well, today, a rather radical new idea came forth to encourage more building, and it's also about capital gains tax. Now, this comes from the McKell Institute, so it's likely to be listened to closely by the Labor Party's leaders. Broadly, the proposal is to change the current 50% discount rate. In other words, if you make $100,000 on an investment, that's discounted to $50,000, which broadly is taxed at your marginal tax rate. But this idea suggests new attached builds, such as apartments, should get a 70% discount. This should encourage more apartments to be built. But existing detached homes, like houses, would have that discount rate for investors cut to 35%. New detached homes, new builds if you like, would stay where they are at 50%. Now, one of the co-authors of this report is Edward Kavanagh, the Chief Executive of the McKell Institute, who joins me now. Edward, many thanks for your time. Just in regards to this, tell me the view of this. You say this can encourage more building to get the government closer to its 1.2 million homes by the end of the decade. The reality is Bill Shorten lost an election off the back of wanting to change negative gearing and capital gains tax. Do you have a sense this will survive politically?
I do think this is a very different type of proposal. This is a proposal that reforms capital gains tax discounts in service of this established national housing mission and in service of our agreed to supply ambitions as a country. And it does so fundamentally in a fairer way. It does mean that on those older established dwellings, there is going to be that lower discount rate. That's something that should be welcomed. But for those that still want to get ahead through an investment, there's an opportunity to do so in line with that national policy that every single state and territory and the Commonwealth have agreed to. So we think this is a very different context now than it was, almost a decade ago when that original CGT discount reform was proposed, and that's why we put this forward in this new context.
Okay, there's one thing in my introduction which I failed to mention, which was an important aspect of what you're suggesting, and that was anybody with a current property investment would have their situation grandfathered going forward. This would only be for new transactions once this were enacted into law.
That's exactly right. Well, look, we think it's really important in any seismic tax reform change such as this that you adopt that grandfathering principle. People haven't been investing in houses with any, moral issues at all. This is a very reasonable thing that people do, in line with existing policy. It's just that moving forward, we need to make sure that this powerful tax incentive is oriented towards supply. At the moment, it isn't. We have a huge amount of capital tied up in speculative investment in the same houses over and over again. It does nothing for supply, and it does nothing fundamentally for fairness in the housing market. So this is a new proposal in a new context, and we think the government should seriously consider it ahead of the Productivity Roundtable next month.
So, Edward, as you were thinking about this, I know you did this with Richard Holden, the noted economist. Did you give any consideration to the fact that you would be giving enormous incentive to be building a lot of high-rise, really very much dense sort of living in apartments, in preference to, say, for example, the outer suburbs where the cities are growing and you get broadacre sort of housing development? The preference that you've got with this policy would be to inner city living and would be to apartment building.
Yeah, I think we do need more supply of that type. I think we do need more supply of apartments in inner city. We need to be honest with ourselves that we're going to need to see denser inner cities in this country if we're going to meet our housing supply targets. We also are seeing not enough investment in certain types of apartments that actually can accommodate growing families. There's basically no 3-bedroom apartments, for example, in areas where people want to live in. So that's a huge problem. This proposal does, though, also create a greater incentive to invest in greenfield detached houses than established detached houses. There is a distinction there, and we think that this provides opportunities to, yes, definitely invest in apartments and in densification, but also in new greenfield sites as well.
But one of the things which this does, and I applaud this, is because I've said for quite some time that no builder and no developer will ever build unless there is a profit incentive there for them. But what you're saying with this plan is if you're going out to build some high-rise apartment or a block of apartments, you get a greater incentive to build, and as a result there would be more housing hit the market because that developer would actually, in a profit situation, keep more of their money.
Look, that's exactly right. And you imagine, people wanting to buy off plan. Sometimes you need to have a certain amount of commitments prior to that project getting ahead. We think that this will encourage more mum and dad investors who, naturally want to invest in new housing or in housing. It'll give them a greater incentive to do so in a housing type that they perhaps otherwise wouldn't. And that's really important in getting projects over the line in the first place. So, there's a whole range of factors that go into housing supply, but fundamentally, the government needs to look at its biggest lever it has at its disposal, and that's the tax system, in order to get this system moving.
Okay, just a very, very quick one. I've got a couple of seconds. Have you put this past the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, yet?
Well, we'll be formally submitting this to the Productivity Roundtable, and we hope that it's actively considered by the Treasurer and the Housing Minister and everyone else in Canberra.